Hello and welcome to part 2 of the first series on Holistic Emotive Practices. This is Brian McPherson. In this presentation, I will discuss the physiological dimensions of emotions as defined by and used in Holistic Emotive Practices, or HEP for short. In order to use HEP, you must be able to identify your mood or emotional state in an unambiguous way. How you use HEP, that is, the words you choose to emote, depends on how you feel. If you cannot recognize and classify your emotions or mood, you cannot take advantage of the power of HEP. Fortunately, that task is not as hard as it may sound. HEP does not employ any of the dozens of words used to signify a specific emotion, such as joy, fear, disgust, or anger, or any of the other numerous terms associated with a particular emotion. Instead, HEP works with terms that describe the physiology of emotions. It is necessary to use emotion physiology in HEP because the connections between speech and emotions is physiologically based. Physiology may sound like a difficult topic to grasp, but instead of complicating the classification of emotions, the use of emotion physiology actually simplifies our task by breaking down our emotional experience into a small number of easily understood concepts. Science has identified 3 physiological dimensions of emotion. We have an emotional arousal system based mainly in the brainstem and consisting chiefly of autonomic functions. Emotions also connect to our pleasure regulation system, based primarily in the limbic system, which is located in the midbrain. The control system of emotion resides, for the most part, in the cortex. We can measure emotional arousal with various physiological measures, the most common being heart rate and blood pressure. HEP does not require you to make such measurements, but only that you recognize your arousal level. In other words, you must know whether you are very excited or very relaxed, or somewhere in between. The pleasure dimension of emotion is the most identifiable aspect of emotions. We can differentiate between our pleasant experiences and our unpleasant ones most readily, and for the purposes of HEP and the physiological dimension of emotion pleasure, that is all that is necessary. The control dimension of emotion is sometimes referred to by the term locus of control. This view employs a broad look at emotional control that distinguishes internal or personal control of the situation from external control, or the feeling that you're not calling the shots, but under the influence or control of an outside force. We can break down internal personal control of emotions into different levels. Sometimes we feel in control in a focused way, other times our control is more diffuse. Control can also be confident or laid back. I get into a more detailed analysis of control in a subsequent presentation. But for now, it suffices to look at the issue of control from the perspective of whether we feel in control or we feel that someone else or something else, such as a fixed schedule, controls us. I want to take some time to discuss some of the corroborating evidence concerning the 3 physiological dimensions of emotions. It doesn't deal directly with HEP, but it does give support to the scientific basis underlying HEP. If you look at the brain in evolutionary terms, broadly speaking, you see 3 distinct stages. The oldest stage harkens back to the evolution of reptiles. This part of the brain roughly corresponds to the brainstem, which controls emotional arousal. The next stage of brain development, the mammalian brain, saw the development of the limbic system and older parts of the cortex. These structures control the emotional reward system that modulates the pleasure dimension of emotion. The most recent brain evolution is the part of the cortex I've identified as the primate brain, also called the neo-mammalian brain. The feelings of emotional control reside in this part of the brain. Along with the division of the brain into 3 evolutionary portions, you can look at the 3 types of recognized human behavior. We act through one of these 3 ways. We can do things in an instinctual way that is hardwired through our genetic code. Or we can learn to act through reinforcement. That is, we will repeat a behavior that results in a positive outcome. Finally, we can act in a self-learned way by thinking through a problem and coming up with a novel approach. Although neural circuitry underlying all types of behavior is widely distributed across the brain, each of these three types of behavior corresponds most strongly to one emotional dimension. Instincts have the greatest influence on the arousal dimension. Instincts swing us into action for shelter, food, and reproducing. Pleasure plays a greater role in learned behavior than either arousal or control. We learn to do things that bring us gratification. Finally, self-learned behavior connects to the control dimension more than the other two dimensions. If we can teach ourselves something, we can control our environment. So far, I have only talked about emotions, but I need to expand the view to include moods. HEP can work with emotions, but it also plays well with moods. Both emotions and moods can be described using the three dimensions of emotions that I have outlined in this talk. It is true that emotions differ from moods. Emotions tend to be more intense than moods, but less frequent. That is, moods are with us pretty much all of the time, but usually in the background, whereas we experience emotions on an infrequent, intermittent basis, but in a more noticeable manner. In HEP, we do not have to distinguish between moods and emotions. What we do have to do to use HEP is identify our current emotion or mood in terms of the three dimensions of emotion. To put it in another way, you have to ask yourself these three questions. How relaxed or aroused do I feel? How unpleasant or pleasant do I feel? And do I feel in control of my physical, emotional, and/or mental environment? If you can answer these, then you are ready to use HEP. This concludes the discussion of emotions in HEP. Part 3 of this series continues with a talk about the physiology of speech. Thanks for listening.